are literally shaping the planet.
Purpose is the only pathway to a regenerative future.
We have a choice to stay with the status quo or to change.
What is the point of trying to be just resilient when we can actually innovate?
It's a huge pleasure to be here and have an opportunity to have, make this presentation to you. So as Kayla mentioned, I've been working in this space probably since 2007 when I founded my agency. And I initially founded it working with not-for-profits. And around that time, I became really interested in social entrepreneurship and realizing that we could tackle some of the thorniest issues and still make a profit. So I was thinking that in this moment of both a health and an economic crisis, that it might be a good time to think about what it means to run a business, what is the role that business can play in reimagining this society that we must redesign. I think capitalism has served us well. It's created a lot of growth and certainly has reduced poverty, broadly speaking, around the world. But as we know, it's also created insane inequality, which we see is absolutely unacceptable, and that we can also remedy if we put our minds to it. So I thought today would be a good opportunity to chat about using a stakeholder lens to scale our impact when we're designing a business. So of course, as we've been told forever, a business model defines the way that an organization creates, delivers, and captures value. So how does it create the products and services that it offers its client? How does it deliver those to them? What systems and processes does it use? And then how does it get paid? How does it capture the value that it's creating? So traditionally, of course, we've looked at this as the value proposition and customers, the delivery of the value through the value chain, and then the revenue engine that creates the revenue, and then ideally makes the organization self-sustaining. And with that, we've said that the primary goal of a business is to maximize shareholder wealth. And whilst there was a reason for that, and it is understandable, we've also established that maximizing shareholder wealth at the detriment of everything else is problematic. So as an example, if we say that a corporation or a company can pollute a stream and it's not material to it, basically it's not its business to have to go and clean it up, then we're essentially saying that businesses have the ability to pass on the cost of negative externalities to the rest of society, which, is probably not the best way of going about it. So the good thing about it is that there has been an evolution from the old economy to the new economy. And we've been talking about the new economy for a while, the same way that, social entrepreneurship, the term was coined in the 80s, and we're still trying to define what a social entrepreneur is. So I'm more of the mind that we need to get on with it. So I believe that the new economy is really well on its way to existing. And that means we've moved from a mode of production where customers were consumers, and we were really focused on shareholder wealth. And of course, CEO compensation being directly tied to the company performance has a role to play in that, because then we're looking at business growth at all costs. And this, of course, then breeds a short-term perspective, because that's what we need to report on is short-term results. With the new economy, I think we're looking at more creative, positive experiences, seeing customers as partners. So we've seen the emergence and, of course, the development of user-centered design, human-centered design, with an aim to producing products and services that improve the quality of life of folks, and aim to design also systems and products that have an eye to sustainability and maybe have ideally a longer-term view of the positive impact that an organization can have. And so Michael Porter in 2011, which seems like a while ago and also seems like really not a long time ago, coined the term shared value. And he defines it as resting on the premise that both economic and social progress must be addressed using value principles. And value is defined as benefits relative to costs, not just benefits alone. And this last sentence is, of course, in reaction to the third sector and its reliance on different forms of funding and its reputation for being inefficient, despite the important role that it plays in society. But I think what Michael Porter was trying to do is to bridge that gap between businesses, the private sector, and the third or public sector, and public sector. And so I really enjoy this diagram because I enjoy a diagram, but because it explains pretty well the shift that we've been going through. And so if we look at more and more, and I think we can name them, those star organizations that have demonstrated that being purpose-driven for-profit corporation means that you can actually be competitive and outperform others. Unilever comes to mind, Patagonia, obviously, Whole Foods, Ben & Jerry's. And so these are obviously corporations who still pursue shareholder benefit, but also look at ensuring that they are maximizing social benefit as much as possible and taking into consideration their stakeholders in the design of the business itself. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But in turn, we can see that the third sector and the public sector has also sort of appropriated some of the mechanisms of the private sector, and in ways that we can see sometimes in impact investing, venture philanthropy, pay for success schemes where the government might hire a for-profit organization because it knows it will get results for a service that it might otherwise have to deliver itself. So this notion of shared value, I think, is becoming more pervasive. And of course, social enterprises are a very good example of that, where we're pursuing a social or environmental goal as part of our main activity, and also seeking to generate a profit and to be self-sustaining in that activity. And so if we look at just the lens of the company itself, and we start thinking about what it means to think about stakeholders from an internal perspective, then thinking about our environmental impact, supplier access, looking at nurturing employee skills and minding worker safety or employee health, being cognizant of our water and energy use and trying to minimize our negative externalities. And you can see that in all of those components are an opportunity to have a competitive advantage and to, in fact, design a business that is more efficient. And when you think about what happened with Toyota and GM desperately trying to copy the efficiency of Toyota and wanting to photograph all of the details of their factories, not realizing that it was in fact the processes and the human processes that had been changed, and the empowerment of employees to try to incrementally improve the processes at their station, and also that those employees would know how to do 7 or 8 things on the line, whereas a GM employee was taught to do one thing and only one thing. So knowing that these are elements that we can leverage to generate a competitive advantage, whilst we're also minding the health and well-being of our stakeholders, is really compelling to me, and I think certainly timely in this moment. So if we kind of broaden our outlook from inside the business to outside the business and the impact that it can have on greater society and external stakeholders, then we start thinking about impact. And if we define impact as significant or lasting changes in people's lives brought about by a given action or series of actions, then we start thinking about all the different people who are connected to us and what happens when we design our business with them in mind. And part of the reason why I'm excited about social enterprises is because by design, they often operate in more uncertain contexts. And as a result, they have to be more innovative and more imaginative because, as an example, they might not know how a competitor might respond in that setting, or there might not be policy or frameworks or infrastructure in place that will allow them to deliver their products or services. So by design, they have to create organizations that are adaptive and innovative. So I wanted to just show you a quick video from an organization that I got to work with in Peru that is a fashion brand that creates clothing in jails in Lima, and how they've considered their stakeholders in the design of the organization. So let's just see if I can switch over to that. So here we have an example of, this could be really any fashion brand, but it was actually designed specifically with the impact model in parallel with the business model. So they source the cotton in Peru. They obviously have are very much embedded in the community because their mission obviously is to help those folks who are incarcerated to gain skills while they are in prison and then leave with the skill set. And in the interim, there's the ability to, of course, learn those new skills and also feel a different sense of belonging to the greater community. So that's a particularly interesting example to me of what happens when you're considering your stakeholders from the get-go. And so, of course, we want to talk about inner circle stakeholders because all your stakeholders are not created equal. And the inner circle stakeholders would be the ones who fit, that you have relational ties with, as opposed to simply transactional ties with them. So it's two-way, it's sustained, it's mutually valuable. And these are folks that you want to consider, because one of the things that enables you to do, of course, is to also identify opportunities. So if you think about your suppliers, the society as a whole, or local communities in which you operate, your business thrives because it exists in this ecosystem. And certainly I think this pandemic is a perfect example of why businesses need to understand the interconnectivity that they have with the communities in which they grow and thrive, as well as everybody else in the ecosystem. So of course, you wouldn't talk to your investors the way that you would to your customers. They would need different things from you. And you also wouldn't talk the same way to a B2B customer than you would a B2C. So you wouldn't talk to an individual the same way that you would a business. And as well, when you think of investors and partners, they might want to know what your customer acquisition cost is or your customer lifetime value is. But your business customer wants to know if you are able to solve their problem that they have in their business. So you can see that by having a win-win stakeholder view, you're able to identify opportunities because you know what you need from them, and you can listen and hear what they need from you, and constantly reevaluate whether or not that relationship is really yielding the most value for both of you. And this also is true for employees. When an organization is values driven, and there's a common goal that we're working towards, then we're able to rally around that and constantly evaluate whether or not that North Star inspires us and guides us to do better. So, as we mentioned, all stakeholders are not created equal, and you do want to consider the distance or the proximity that a stakeholder might have to your organization. So you might simply want to connect with them or become more involved with them and have an opportunity to participate, have them participate in what you're doing, or find opportunities to collaborate. And I think one of the things that's key to think about is that when you engage deeply in the community and you have the ability to understand what their needs are, then you're able to adapt, whether it be changing your products or services. We're seeing this right now as an example when we look at the economic development initiatives that are successful. We're seeing that folks are coming that are getting invited to the table from different areas, and knowing that it's that interconnectedness, that it's that necessity for collaboration, for listening, for inviting diverse folks to the table, for ensuring that there are ramps of access to people who have been traditionally marginalized. This will help us to design more nuanced and appropriate solutions, more just solutions as well. And so if we value each other and treat our stakeholders as valuable assets, then there is that ability to exponentially create shared value. And it does not preclude, as we mentioned before, being competitive and having the ability to generate profit. but also being able to ensure that we're minimizing negative externalities and capitalizing on potential opportunities. Building trust with meaningful interactions, obviously, is also an important one. We talked earlier about human-centered design, and I think the same can apply to your stakeholders. There's our opportunities to interact with folks and listen to what they truly need from you, and not just from a transactional perspective, but really from a relational perspective. And again, I'm thinking about, about restaurants in this moment, and how they've adapted to what people need, and people have also adapted to what restaurants could do so that they could support them. So I think it's become really evident that trying to operate a business without that lens of understanding that you're part of an ecosystem, and that you can't neglect huge parts of the ecosystem, otherwise it will necrotize and the system will cease to function. And I think really this is what we're seeing currently in this difficult economic situation, but also difficult social situation because of the weakening of the social contract. So if we can partner with folks, find opportunities to establish authentic relationships with stakeholders, then we have a much better chance of redesigning these systems that no longer work. Because at this moment, we're constantly trying to define who's creating value and who is destroying it. This line has been drawn that leads us to believe that the financial sector is creating all this value while the real economy isn't so much. So what does it mean to own a business? What does it mean to provide good jobs for people? What does it mean to create loyalty in your supply chain? I mean, it took, interestingly enough, I think it took, what's his name? Phil Knight, the CEO of Nike. I don't know if you recall the scandal in the mid-1990s about obviously child labor in Nike factories. And it took him 5 years to realize that he in fact was responsible for his supply chain, that he should do something about it. And in fact, in 1998, he did, and established some standards. And now Nike is very well regarded in terms of its stewardship of its supply chain. But it takes a decision. It takes a desire to design a better business and to listen to stakeholders and truly care about whether or not you're creating win-win scenarios. And with that, I think there's also a real opportunity and a responsibility to incorporate nuances and priorities to achieve win-win. So we're seeing a lot of rural economic development in this moment, and also obviously urban centers are suffering, but because of the urban exodus, I think there's a risk and a potential that we try to apply urban solutions to rural settings or to different communities with not enough regard to the specificity of the context and the specificity of the methods that might lead to the biggest potential for success. So I do believe that we have the tools. I want to leave you with this thought from of course, one of the leaders of conscious capitalism, John Mackey, that trade-offs and win-lose scenarios are fundamentally the result of a lack of creativity. I think we have the creativity, we have the diversity of voices, we have the talent that we need and the resources for the most part that we need, because all communities have wealth. And by that, I mean they have knowledge, they have relationships, they have community, they have trust. If we can leverage that by having a genuine, authentic engagement with each other, where we listen, where we invite people to the table to hear differing opinions and to work together to try to design solutions that are more nuanced and that torpedo this reliance on othering, on saying that certain people are of value, certain neighborhoods are of value, and others maybe less so. Because unless we decide that we're really truly all in this together, and though we're not feeling it in the same way, we need to listen to other people's lived experiences. we need to take into consideration that our businesses get to thrive and grow because we nurture and we are part of nurturing the ecosystems in which they operate. So thank you for letting me share some thoughts here. And I think that I've left enough time. I don't know if we have the ability or the desire to go to some questions or anything like that, but
yes, we have a couple of minutes extra before our last closing session. So
I'll stop sharing my screen that way.
A moment to type. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A in the next 3 or 4 minutes so we can, Isabelle can answer those. And if anyone has questions outside of this that you think of later, please feel free to throw those in the Slack channel. We've been having some discussions there outside of the session. So we'll just give it a moment or two.
Awesome. Perfect. All right, well, it doesn't look like there are any questions, but I appreciate you having me. And
yeah, thank you so much, Isabelle. And like I said, please, if anyone just has questions that they think of later outside of this, I can put you in touch with Isabelle as well. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.